Hello everyone, let's talk about the Antiquarian. So, I'm going to go out ahead and say that I think this is a very strong second build. I don't see it being that strong as a league starter, minus one notable exception that could potentially make this league starter, but most of the effects here synergize with very powerful but more complicated current meta builds. So, first node we have here is Farshot. This one's not particularly impressive. Farshot exists on several other things, and it is kind of weird for a projectile-based skill to be in a Marauder Ascendancy. There is some projectile-related nodes we could grab, but a lot of the... Generally, you're going to want some of the projectile nodes on the right side of the tree if you're going a projectile scale, or potentially elemental scaling on the top side of the tree. So it's a bit limiting, but there are a few builds that could take advantage of Farshot. It's not too bad. You know, it's up to 60% increase. I mean, 60% more damage if you can get max projectile range. Just not something we typically associate with Marauder. Next, we have Exhibit 222. And this is your hits can't be evaded. 50% reduced dexterity. Hits can't be evaded is most valuable for A, builds doing crit that don't have access to accuracy, so Marauder can take advantage of that actually. So you could build Earthquake crit without having to put any accuracy on gear, and you're not building dexterity anyway generally. On bottom side of the tree, you're stacking armor and you're stacking maximum resistances. You're probably not doing spell suppression. So yeah, that could potentially, there's no downside there. Also, it can be used for some trigger skills like Cast on Crit and Cast while Channeling. Both struggle to build accuracy because they want to build other stats, because generally most of the damage is from the spell they're triggering. And this would allow you to forgo building any accuracy, and you don't have to worry about trying to craft hits can't be evaded on an in-game dagger or something. So you could free up your weapon slot to be whatever you want. It's very good. Next is Line Eye Shield. 50% chance... Gain 50% chance to block from equipped shield instead of the shield's value. So this is more valuable on League Start or on builds using specific unique shields. So we can talk about Aegis Aurora, Sappho's. Sappho's frame won't work because it just has a global can't block. I had the wiki open somewhere. Where were we? Here we are. Yeah, so here's all the unique shields in the game. So if you're going to... You can see that most unique shields don't have that much chance to block on them, only like 37 to 30. This one has 48, which is rather high, but you can see that it's an exception and not the rule. Dawnbreaker is. So these could all be shields you might be interested in running on a build, and you get a lot of extra base block chance out of your shield if you have this node. Later, rare shields are going to outscale this, so maybe this is something you unspec later if you're only using a unique shield temporarily. But hey, you know, it's definitely here. You get some value out of this. I don't think it's anything to write home about, but it's not bad. Now we're going to get into the nodes that are clearly built around certain specific late-game mechanics that are extremely strong. 1,000% increased stun and block recovery. This is clearly made for a Blood Notch build. And if you don't know what Blood Notch is... Blood Notch is up to 60% of damage taken from stunning hits is recovered as life. What this node will do is it will make it to where the stun barely does anything to us. We still get stunned, technically, but you know, you only freeze up for less than a quarter of a second. If you have this node, you recover from the stun very quickly. And that allows you to benefit from the full recoup without having the negative side effect of being stunned. So that's what this node seems to be built around to me, is a Blood Notch build, which isn't something you would League Start. Generally, Blood Notch is a relatively expensive item. Who knows? But I wouldn't League Start it. Maybe because we don't know how much interest there'll be in the item this league. Next is you have no intelligence, plus 150 strength. This one to me is just kind of meh. On a strength stacker, it's good. We'll see a node that synergizes very well with this. But once again, this isn't going to help you on a League Start. The do not league start this Ascendancy. Later, there's a strength stacking build that synergizes well with this node, and we'll talk about that here in a second. 1% increased duration per 10 strength. Now, there are two reasons that this is strong enough to enable strength stacking. One is that increased duration, not just increased duration of skills, mind you, but just increased duration is a very, very rare stat in the game. Even increased duration of skills is a pretty rare stat. And the reason it's rare is because it allows some skills to get pseudo infinite damage. And what I mean by that is a skill like Spark, right? As long as that Spark projectile is out, it's still bouncing around and has potential to damage the enemy. If your Spark projectile lasted for 2 minutes and you just keep casting Spark, your damage is just going to keep ramping and ramping and ramping and ramping and ramping, and it doesn't go away. Storm Call's another notable use of it, and so is... what's that other one called? There's another lightning skill that scales really well with increased duration that's escaping my mind. But basically, you're going to have there's going to be a lot of late game builds that are going to grab the plus 150 flat strength, this duration node, stack strength, and then they're going to path to the north side of the tree through the Scion area, grabbing the more duration nodes. Can go ahead and show those. This is on a different build I have pulled up. But you would path north up here, and you would grab increased skill effect duration, and then you would grab more skill duration on this duration mastery, right? And you would keep pathing north, and you would scale into, you grab the increased skill effect duration here, and you would scale into spells, right? That would be what you would do, and that can allow you to get way more damage out of certain skills that scale well with duration. I'm sorry, I don't have a list handy with me. Bad YouTuber, but that was apparent already by the Microsoft Paint, so hopefully you expected that. But yeah, that's an archetype that's supported here. I would say that these two are made for each other. The other build is a meme build you'll see on Reddit that looks pretty funny, and that's doing an Earthquake build, which makes it to where your Earthquake lasts longer, but the Earthquake takes longer to trigger, but the longer it takes to trigger, it deals more damage. So you fire off an Earthquake, and 30 seconds later, the Earthquake pops and does a ton of damage. But obviously, that's not going to be good for mapping. That's a bossing thing, and even then, it's be very annoying to use. I wouldn't play it, but it does sound hilarious. Then we have Runic Tablet, and I'm going to go ahead and talk about all three of these together, because all three of these are screaming at the top of their lungs either ward loop or ward play style. Runic Tablet's a little bit different because you actually have to have your ward break for it to trigger, and I'm assuming that Ores Resolve, which is used in every ward loop build, will not trigger this node. If it does, when you take damage while you have Ores Resolve, then this is potentially really strong. First, let me briefly describe how ward works. So how ward normally works is that after you take damage, it will reduce that damage you take by the amount of ward you have, and then the ward will go on cooldown for 2 seconds, and then it will come back, right? Let me make sure I got the timer right. 1 second. It's 2 seconds, right? Yeah, it's 2 seconds. Okay. After 2 seconds, it will break and it will come back. This means that if you are leveling and you have like 5 ward, just throw out, every time you get hit, you're going to proc Adrenaline, which is super strong. Adrenaline is one of the best buffs in the game. 100% increased attack damage, and then 25% increased attack, cast, and movement speed, and 10% physical damage reduction. Very strong buff, but Champion triggers it a little bit easier, but we'll ignore that for now. Then we have gain ward instead of 50% of armor and evasion on equipped body armor. So potentially, with the combination of these two nodes, you could have Adrenaline in the early game. I do not see this being particularly useful
in a late game build. I could be wrong, but generally the problem with Ward is that there's two types of damage in this game. There's really big single hits that kill you, and then there's death by 1,000 cuts. Ward, by default, does not help you at all with death by 1,000 cuts, and it generally can't reach high enough numbers to save you from the big hits, like the big slams, the like Shaper Slam, for example. Generally, you're not mitigating that with Ward. You're using some form of physical damage reduction, potentially blocking it. You get the idea, something like that. But since we're getting so much Ward from our equipped body and evasion armor, then maybe we do that. It's also a little bit awkward because armor is generally more valuable the more of it you have. So losing half the armor on your body is kind of a big deal if you're trying to use armor to any efficient amount at all. I'm really not seeing any value here except for Ward Loop. And then we have this last node, which is 100% increased global defenses, a very strong stat for Ward Loop, and 100%, let me remove the arrow because it is blocking, 100% faster restoration of Ward. This one right here. I do think, now that I'm done talking about how bad Ward normally is, I think this is broken on Ward Loop. Ward Loop uses a flask called Orith's Resolve. Let me just go ahead and... should be on this page, right? Yeah, Orith's Resolve. Ward does not break during effect, so you would stop using the adrenaline node, but you get 85% less Ward during effect. But since the ward does not, and it restores ward on use, but that's not too important. But basically you have, since your ward does not break, your ward just turns into pure damage reduction against all hits. And what this allows you to do is run a cast on damage taken setup that casts spells based on damage you take. And you can pay that cast on damage cost using your ward. And it loops with itself, and you essentially have a ward loop that goes on forever, always casts spells, never stops casting spells, and you have a lot of damage reduction. This is a massive amount of increase to the amount of damage reduction you have on a ward loop build, and potentially allows you to start playing ward loops sooner. I wouldn't league start this, but I would look at any ward loop guide will probably end up getting updated with these two nodes. It should be a very substantial increase to the power of ward loop characters. But I, once again, wouldn't league start it, and if you're playing ward loop, you're absolutely not using this node. I think Runic Tablet's a bait. I don't think it's good. It's the only node, it's one of the nodes you have to play if you're league starting this, but I really wouldn't league start it. And I would say that kind of covers all the main ideas of this ascendancy. In my opinion, this ascendancy is just going to become a ward loop ascendancy or a strength stacking ascendancy with a duration skill. And those are the two archetypes here. You can also do some Blood Knot shenanigans with either one of those if you wish, but I don't... let me put it this way. There's not a lot of generic value in this ascendancy. This ascendancy is purely very specific value. The builds that already use ward, love this. The builds that already stack duration, love this. You could even do a Penance Brand of Dissipation build, right? Penance Brand's damage scales basically infinitely. Penance Brand of Dissipation with duration. You could make a Penance Brand last for 2 minutes, and by the time it's ramped to 2 minutes, it's going to be dealing enough damage to kill Uber Shaper twice every time it activates, right? And that will be super cool, but for most of us, you only make one build, maybe two. You're not going to fully be able to take advantage of this ascendancy. But hey, if you want to make a second build, you can take a look at this ascendancy. That's the end of my analysis, and I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope this was at least somewhat insightful onto what you can and cannot do with this ascendancy.